Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Curiosities in Psychology. So this week I ventured down to the country and visited an equestrian centre called Full Gallop, which specialises in equine therapy. So I was joined there by Leslie Rogers, the owner of Full Gallop, who has been doing equine therapy for the past 12 years, as well as working as a conventional therapist. Her daughter Becca also joined us as she works as the equine specialist who trains and works with the horses to ensure that they're suitable and comfortable with being used as therapy horses. So I hope you enjoy this episode. Let me know your thoughts. And as always, if you'd like to see more, head to my Insta, TikTok, or Facebook pages. But otherwise, sit back and I hope you enjoy this episode. So thank you for having me here today, Leslie, in your home full with horses.
Thank you for coming. It's lovely to see you.
Thank you. So how long have you actually been in Allen's Rivulet for, and how long have you been running Full Gallop?
Yes, I moved to Tasmania 26 years ago, and 21 years ago I moved to this property, and I've been here since then. We've had horses the whole time, and we started Full Gallop equine therapy about 12 years ago, I'd say, something like that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So what was it that made you want to look at equine therapy in general, and what made you study it and then decide to do it as a career?
Yeah, okay. So I've worked in mental health for many years. Initially, my tertiary degree was in a double major in teaching and psychology, but I quickly realised that it was psychology that I enjoyed the most. And I've worked in all sorts of different fields, but leading up to the time when I started the equine therapy program, I was working for a not-for-profit, and we had a new program coming up for children, many of which had had a lot of traditional talk therapy and needed something, but were really, really over sitting and talking to someone in an office. Yep. And my original approach is traditional therapy. And actually, my boss at the time said to me, what are we going to do with these kids? Can you sling them on a horse? And, of course, everybody laughed, and I said, I'd like to. And then about a day later, he said to me, there is actually a therapy approach which uses horses. Yep. And so I got very excited, and it happened to be Easter, so I had heaps of time to indulge myself. And I found a program that was run through the USA, run by a company called Gallop, which is the Equine Growth and Learning Association, which is on there. And I was, it was a lot of money. It was most of the training was in the US, and I thought it's just not going to happen. And then I spied one that was in Geelong. Okay. And I was extremely excited. It was public holiday. I didn't have time to ring and ask, can I book some training, and can you pay for it, and can I go? But I booked it anyway, and I went into work after Easter and said, I've booked some training. Yeah. I'm going to it. I won't be at work in that period, and can you please pay for it? And they literally said, look, you've never asked for anything. Please do.
Okay, wow.
So I went. I only really booked for the first week, which was the introduction. By morning tea on day one, I was so excited, and I just said, "What can I do? What can I do? I want to use this." And they said, "Well, you need the 2 weeks." So I booked for the second week, and I think the expression is the rest is history.
So I also used to think that equine therapy is quite a niche kind of topic, but I feel like it is kind of used more often these days in general. Yeah. So is it used for any particular clients, or most helpful for any particular clients?
Not really. To be honest, it's really useful for everyone in so many different ways. It has become very topical more recently. 10 or 12 years ago, it was very much unheard of. Yeah. And I've got a horse throwing things around in the background. And it's just become more and more popular. And in recent times, actually since COVID, it's just been crazy how much interest. It creates a huge amount of interest. And we have logos on our cars, and you just see heads go around and people write phone numbers.
I have seen them.
Yeah,
we get out at traffic lights and run a business card over to someone.
Okay, wow.
So, it is very useful for all sorts of personal growth and learning, mental health conditions. We haven't, personally as a company, we haven't worked with people with physical injury, and that's not to say it can't be done. It's just that we haven't invested in looking at how that can be done. But apart from that, we've had people, the youngest, I think, probably 5, and the oldest in their 60s, I think.
Yeah.
But we recently had a request to take the horses to a aged care facility. So
Okay, yeah.
we're looking at whether we can do that. So,
Yeah,
yeah. If you specifically want me to talk about what specifically does it help, I mean, I can talk about that, but it's very broad range.
Yeah,
So.
we might get onto
Yeah,
specifically.
totally.
Yeah, so I used to think that equine therapy was quite a niche type of therapy, but I feel like nowadays it's used quite a lot, or at least more frequently than it used to be. So is it used particularly for any type of mental health conditions, or is it kind of used broadly for all kinds of conditions?
Yes, very much for all kinds of conditions, plus personal growth and learning. So most people can benefit from spending some time involved with horse therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you think it is a niche topic, or do you think that just in Australia, we're a little bit behind, and it is actually quite, a well-known therapy in other areas?
Actually becoming much more well-known, particularly, I think, since COVID, for some reason. We're getting requests daily, and I think there's been a few TV shows there, and I just think it's getting a lot more attention than it was. So I'm not sure that it's niche. I think there's a host of therapists that would like to use this as an approach and just really don't know how to start.
Yeah.
I'm actually presenting to PAC in a couple of months' time to explain what equine therapy is, because there is so much interest. Probably niche, but only because people don't know how to access it and don't know how to actually make it work for them and their clients.
Yeah.
I think also it's a lot more developed in the US than it is, say, here, because considering they rent out barns and equine specialists, so my job, and then a mental health professional comes in and works with a team of horses, someone who might not exactly have access to horses, because not everyone does, they're not exactly easy to keep.
Yep.
And so it's getting a lot more accessible through, especially that sort of way, conventional psychologists can come in and use the horses and do the training and not have to read a horse and understand their body language and understand all that side of it.
Yeah.
Which gives people a lot more access to it and a lot more ability to, run it themselves without having the horses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The idea, and as Becca says, it's used overseas in a similar way, and it's something we're looking at too, would be for a conventional therapist to be able to say, my client would benefit from having some time in the open air with a horse, and, I think I might be able to help them benefit from that. Can we use your facilities? And what would happen, and this is what's happening overseas, is you provide the suitable horses and an equine specialist such as Beck, where she handles the horses and she's there to ensure that everything's safe and that things are not happening that shouldn't be, and can also discuss with the therapist, the sort of parameters of what you can do within an equine session, which hopefully do that beforehand.
Yeah.
But that's done a lot overseas.
Yeah.
And it is something we've looked at whether we could start doing that, because I would really like equine therapy to be available much more widely to much more people, because it's just so powerful.
Yeah.
After having worked for many, many years in conventional therapy, and I still do, you will have things happen in a session that could take you months to get to. And I can continue here and talk about why, if you want me to do that.
Go for it.
So what happens is the person that's working with the horse, the attention is on the horse and what the horse is doing. So there's a lot of projection goes on. There's a lot of metaphorical learning. So you're not sitting in a room with everybody's looking at me and I need to be fixed, there must be something wrong with me, which is unfortunately an easy decision to make when you're taken to therapy every week. You don't want to go, but no, you need something.
Yep.
When you come to hang out with a horse in the open air, people go away joyful for a start.
Yep.
They don't feel like they're to be fixed, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And they expose is the wrong word, but they allow you access to things that are going on in their mind that they don't even know they're giving you access to, because they're talking about what the horse thought and why the horse did something. And with the use of clean conversation, you can actually get them, people will realise quite quickly, that happens to me. That's really funny. That happens in my life.
And that's where quite often my role comes in, because obviously they're my horses. I know them inside and out, and someone will pick up things or say that a horse is a certain way, and I know them inside and out, and it'll be completely them projecting onto the horse like, oh, this one's feeling like this, and I'm like, no, don't think so. But it's just interesting, like, because you understand the horse so well, and then you'll put it in a situation and they very much mirror what the person's feeling.
Yeah.
And so you'll get so many different behavioural changes and reactions and things, and people also just interpret things as like, oh, they're really angry at me, and it's like, no, they're actually really happy right now.
And we won't do that interpretation of what the horse is feeling. But we might ask the questions. That's where the therapeutic or the analytical side comes in, is asking the questions to get the person to realise, oh, weren't they angry? You know, so you definitely wouldn't say to them, oh, no, that horse wasn't angry. But you might. So I can give an example where a young guy we had a horse in a corral. It was standing close to the fence. He came up to the fence and the horse moved away. It was a hot day, and it moved actually into some shadow or shade. And he said, oh, nothing ever likes me. And I said, oh, that must feel tough. And I got him to look at the space and say, well, what are you noticing in that space? And he eventually came to, well, there's shade over there and there's not over there. Oh, okay. And what are you noticing? And he quite quickly said, that horse moved into the shade, didn't it? I said, it did, didn't it? So he said, and he just like, I thought that was me. I said, you did, didn't you? And he started laughing. And that's as much as you need to say. It's not, you don't work anywhere near as hard, the therapist, in equine therapy as you do in traditional counselling. It's the whole process unfolds. I know that sounds really strange, but that is, and the key to making it work well is just asking the questions in a curious way that gets the person to think, wow. And sometimes it's not even verbal. Sometimes they don't need the discussions. So I can definitely go more into how the process works, but that's just an example. So,
no, that's a great example. That reminds me of, I saw this documentary years ago by Martin Clunes called Horsepower.
That was the one I was trying to think of.
And he went all around the world looking at the connection between horses and people, and how we kind of work with horses in different cultures. And there was this one scene where he was in America and he went to an equine therapy session, and it was a group session. And he decided to participate just because he was there and wanted to be part of it. And he actually got really emotional working with the horse.
Very quickly.
And he did. And it was really interesting. And I feel like you kind of already answered this, but what do you think it is in particular that working with horses or animal assisted therapy in general is that kind of allows us to kind of be more in touch with our emotions or bring them out? More so than when we're in a therapy room itself.
I might answer and then hand over to Becca as well. But first, I'm going to answer in two parts. So I think there's huge scope for all animal therapy. I think dogs are amazing and all sorts of other animals. But there is, I'm a little biased, and I love dogs. We have lots of dogs. They're normally running around, but we put them away today. Horses offer something extra. And the reason that is that dogs are predators. We're predators. Horses are prey animals. So they have survived for as long as they have by being acutely aware of their environment. So they're highly, highly intuitive. They're hyper vigilant. They're hypersensitive, and they're listening out, and they haven't learned to manipulate. So dogs manipulate. Dogs will get you to give them a bit of your sandwich.
That's true.
Horses don't. Horses really are who they are, and they're responding to what they feel and see in the moment. So that gives a huge capacity for people working with anxiety, working with PTSD. If you think about what a horse is, they are huge, 500 kilos, incredibly powerful, incredibly sensitive, hypervigilant, instant reactions. And people with something like PTSD really connect with that. So that's one thing. So dog therapy, amazing too, but there is something particularly special. I think the other thing is that they read us. They read our genuine feelings, not the feelings that we have cleaned up and made sanitized to present to the world.
They don't take on our appearance at all. They don't judge what they see, they judge what they feel.
Exactly, yes. So they will respond to what's really going on inside. And a lot of people are out of touch with what's going on inside. So when somebody who, and I really understand this, I don't feel angry, you know, I never feel angry. I don't have, and people say I've got anger issues, and the horse won't come near them. And it's like, what's going on there? And so you get access to parts of people that they don't even know exist. They get access, and so does the therapy team. So do you want to say a bit about how the...
So on the whole prey animal thing, horses take in stuff and absorb stuff so differently to us, even in the way of their eyes. Like, we're predators. We fixate on a point and we can see that. Everything else blurs out. Whereas a prey animal, they're seeing everything. They're taking in everything because they need to know if that blade of grass moves, there could be a lion behind there. And so it's so similar to people, especially I compare it to myself. I've got complex PTSD. And the way that they approach situations and almost teach yourself to approach situations is actually how you need to approach them. Like, how a horse reacts to things. Like, it's not a conscious thing. Like, you'll see them spook at something. Their brain has not even registered that that's going on. Their body just reacts. And with anxiety or with PTSD especially, your body reacts before your brain does. And so you go in, your subconscious brain reacts before your conscious brain. And so you go into situations, and if you almost approach it like a horse would, if it's spooking at something, like, okay, let myself absorb this for a second and assess the situation and then go into it. You actually feel like, oh, I'm more settled in myself. And that's how horses act, because they have to take it in. They have to make sure that they're not going to get killed, and then be like, okay, I'm calm now, I'm safe, I'm in a good environment. And they also do that by syncing their heartbeats with anything in I think it's about a 5 metre radius. And so if your heart raises because you sense a threat, theirs also elevates. And so it means that, you know, if one of them in the herd situation sees something, all of them know to run. And so when you're working with someone, they connect with their heartbeat as well. So they feel what you're feeling in your body, not just what's going on in your brain.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't know that about the horse's heartbeat as well.
So a lot of the time in a typical session, and sometimes you think about people that are scared of horses. Like, I have a lot of people that come that are scared of horses.
I was going to ask that.
Most people, if they've got access to horses, are less likely to think about equine therapy because they get some benefits. I mean, there is benefit to a traditional session, because things happen that you would never expect to happen. Like, you've had horses, I've had a horse that 15 years and seen it do something. I'm like, no, that would never happen, because it's something different happens. It's just the way it is. But people that are frightened, they don't, we tailor every session to what that person's needs at that moment. So we don't have a preordained plan that we're going to work through this. We don't try to put people into our mould. If someone turns up and they are really frightened, they may just stand right back and just watch. And we will move ourselves away. So we don't go far enough away that they feel deserted. We don't go in and have a cup of tea or anything. But we're away enough for them to have that space to themselves. Sometimes just that can have the most amazing effect. We had a lady bringing a young guy, and she said before we got out the car, he seemed different. He was just watching what the horses were doing. So sometimes things happen just in that tiny moment of watching a connection between them. The next step might be, could you touch it? Over a gate. So we'll start as far back as they need to. Through to doing, lots of exercises where they're raising their energy, so the horse raises its energy and seeing what happens there, and lowering their energy and talking about what effect did that have, and how do you think, why might that be? And, so they're all of that, those very sort of narrow parameters of this happens in an arena with a horse because of our tendency to generalize, we just get extended out to life. And sometimes it's discussed and sometimes there's no discussion. There doesn't have to be any discussion. And people go away and they just function better.
A lot of the times I think they actually can't put it into words exactly. They're just like, I don't know, but I'm just able to get up, and I've just keep having these realizations since coming, and all that's changed in their life is literally coming and spending time with the horses. And some of them aren't even doing that much with them because they might be particularly like anxious of horses or something, but they'll still get the benefits of having like a huge like aha sort of moment. And the only thing that they can put it down to is that they've, you know, done a session or 2 sessions with the horses, and that's all that's changed in their life.
If I can give an example, we had a lady bring a young guy, and she'd said that he's struggling really badly with his self-esteem and anxiety and a whole range of, you know, very common mental health issues that we have. He wasn't particularly keen to come, wasn't particularly raving about having been here. Was pretty quiet with the horse, spent a lot of time connecting, and just we always do remove ourselves, you know. I don't know how many meters, I'm not really good with distance, but just enough so they can feel that you're not just sort of observing them quite as much. And we are always watching to see what the horse might do and what might happen.
We also make sure to add that we're not observing them per se, but watching that the horse doesn't do anything that could upset them, so it doesn't feel like we're standing back monitoring them. So it doesn't feel like, you know, they're getting watched and studied. It's sort of we're just keeping an eye on the horse, making sure it doesn't do anything, and leaving you to spend time with it.
So he would spend from the first session this quiet time, very gentle, and then go away, and Mum would say, how was that? And he'd say, it's all right. But she rang and she said to me, he's getting out of bed every day. He wasn't. He was sleeping till the afternoon. And she said, he's having breakfast with me and he's so much more positive about life. And there was just so much positivity. And, he wanted to keep coming. He didn't say anything. He didn't reveal anything. We didn't do any, sort of half-hearted traditional therapy or anything like that. We just let him spend time with the horses. And it increased what he was doing. He was doing a bit more as he became more confident. But we never talked about it. And Mum said it just made a huge difference in how he approached his life and how positive he felt about what he could achieve. So
that's great. There does seem to be something kind of uniquely calming about just spending time with horses in general, even if you're not really doing much. So can you take me through generally what a therapy session would look like and what someone could expect from a session?
So should we talk as though this is somebody who's been a few times and they've got a bit of confidence? Confidence, not necessarily confidence, but they're not terrified. So, for example, a bit of understanding. They've done a few sessions with us. So we would usually have discussed which horse we think they may want to use, but we always ask who would they like to work with. By then they've normally got some feeling about, we make sure.
Do you work with a few different horses the first couple of sessions?
We work, there are very few on the property that we own that we don't work with, unless the babies. We don't really work with the babies because we do have babies here. But there are some that are better. We will ask them who do they want to work with. That in itself tells you something. So we had, one young guy, full on energy, and he would pick the quietest horse. And then we'd get somebody who's really quite hesitant, and she'd pick the one with ADHD that just cannot stand still, running everywhere, looking at everything. And they decide, for themselves, the people that are coming. So we do make sure that they've had a chance to get to know them, so we'll take them and show them and they spend time stroking them and knowing them in that way. But when they've been coming for a little while, we'll say, who do you want to work with? And sometimes they vary that and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just want to work with the same horse. I had a young guy that'd been coming for a while and he looked really glum this time, and I said, what's wrong? And he said, what's going to happen when Vienna dies? And I said, what do you mean? What are you worrying about? He said, well, I'm going to have to stop coming. And I said, no. I said, it's going to be very sad. It will be sad for all of us. it happens to all of us, but you can keep coming. And he said, oh, I'm so relieved, because he thought that meant, because he only worked with Vienna, because he chose her, he thought that meant he couldn't come anymore. So no, they really do, and it will depend to some degree on where they're at that moment. So sometimes they're feeling less energetic, they want a less energetic horse. We don't ask why, we just let them choose who they want to work with. So to run through what might be a fairly typical session, well, fairly typical is the wrong word, because there isn't a typical one, but I'll run through a session. Say you've got somebody working with a particular issue, we don't get into it's sort of fairly content free, we don't delve into anything at all, but we might say, as a general exercise, use some of the props that we have around, there's bits and pieces around, and set up a space that feels good for you to be in, and something where you know that's your safe space when you need it. So it might be something in your life, it could be somewhere you know that you go, somewhere in your head, whatever that is. And so they're really willing to do that. They're really willing. I've not had anyone not willing to work metaphorically. So they'll set up a space. Oh yeah, great. Now set up a space you don't like being in, that sometimes you have to go there, or sometimes you're frightened you might have to go there, but it does happen, and you know what I mean, and you can think of where it is and set that up as well. And they're very willing to do that too. And then we might say, okay, how about you lead the horse over to the space that you feel good, and if you want to, you can take the horse in with you, but if you'd rather they weren't in there with you, don't, but you just do what feels right. So quite often they'll take the horse into the space and stand there with them, and they'll stroke them and talk to them and have a quiet time. And then I might say to them, do you feel like coming out of that space and seeing whether the horse is comfortable there? And they say yes. If they say no, they don't have to do that either. Another time we might say, and then how about you take the horse over to the space that feels horrible for you? Do you want to do that? And they say, yeah, I do. Do you want to stay in that space with the horse? And they will. Now, if they want to talk about it, they might say, it doesn't feel as bad when I'm in here with the horse. Or they might say, I've never thought of a place, I've never thought that I could take something with me. I might say to them, depending on where they are in their own development and where we are in our relationship, could you take something with you which represents the horse? Is there something you could think of that you can keep in your pocket? And some people have done that. There's other sessions where we don't talk. So trying to describe a typical session is very hard.
With horses, there's not much that's typical. They'll do something different every day.
The thing is, with the sessions, they don't necessarily behave how they behave. Like, they are very different within a session. I can give an example of that. This was quite early on, actually, quite a long time ago. We had some people here. It was actually not really run groups very often, but this was a group. The lady had no experience with horses, was pretty nervous of being around them at all. We were in an enclosed space. We were working inside where you could see the horses, but we were away from them and talking about different things. And she explained how she'd had some things happen in her life and how it just made her heart so sore. And she'd hold her hand here when she was talking. That continued for a while, talking to different people. We then went outside and said, does somebody want to do some work with the horses and just let whatever happens unfold? And she said, well, I'd like to, but I'm really nervous. And I said, that's okay. You don't do as much or a little as you want to. Anyway, she said, I want to work with that one. And she pointed to the biggest horse there. And he was actually an ex-dressage horse, which was incredibly well behaved, had immaculate manners. There's no way he'll come into your space. He knows you don't, I'm a horse, I don't come into your space, I don't shake my head around, I don't do anything. And traditionally, when I was doing the training, you're encouraged to use horses who are as natural as possible, so that they're still in touch with who they are as horses, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do.
And I thought, you're not going to get anything out of him. He's just beautifully behaved.
It's too good.
And he's just going to stand there and he won't react. So I was like, because it was quite early on, and we're still, we were still learning back then. She stood at the edge of the corral and he didn't come near, and I thought, this is a bit worrying. And she said, can I go in? And I said, yeah, of course you can. She climbed in and he turned around and he barreled straight towards her and he put his muzzle right on her heart, and she just started crying, and he stood there and he was breathing, and she just was crying.
Yeah.
And that there were nothing said about it. She just afterwards said that was the most touching and amazing thing I've ever experienced.
Yeah.
So that wasn't a conventional session that as we've developed and you
That's
know,
a
our
lovely
skills have
story,
developed.
though.
But it was
Yeah.
just that I couldn't believe he would do that, because
Yeah.
that's totally against everything he'd ever done and would ever do in a situation where we were about to ride him, or he knew his job, and I'm here to be ridden, and I'm not going to stand on your foot or come into your space. You
Yeah.
know, so.
It just shows
Yeah.
how strong
Yeah.
some emotions can be.
So that's one of the things with equine therapy, is that because it's the sort of the model which people use is so different. Lots of people think equine therapy is ridden, and on top of a horse. But when you do that, the dynamic changes.
Yeah, definitely.
You are in charge. You are, in horse terms, you'd be the head mare. You're the one that leads, and they get comfort from that. But when it's ground based, there's not that sort of, they're not in the same mindset of, oh, I'm working, I'm doing my job. They're more like a horse.
Yeah.
They're able to move around the arena, eat some grass if they want to, go explore something, and rather than just being like a robot. It's not the same as when they have personality, and you can see, and sort of you can even people which don't have much experience with horses can see the different personalities in each of them, and we might even get them to label, what do you think this horse is like if you had to describe them? And it's really interesting, the words which they'll come up with that just I wouldn't put on that horse, but they've obviously picked up something else, and that's because they have a different relationship than I'd have with them, considering I train them. And it's really interesting to watch and see how, the most energetic one can be lazy with a little kid, or the one that I swear has ADHD will suddenly be falling asleep in someone's arms. And it's just, they really adjust to what the person's needing.
Yeah, definitely. And I agree, it's very different riding to be on the ground with them. I liked what you said before as well about how, you don't necessarily have to talk in a session. I think that's a big difference between therapy in a room and out here, because that's often why people don't go to therapy, because they're like, I don't want to chat about it, I'm too scared to. Whereas here you can just come, and it doesn't have to be like that.
Well, if I was to go into that a bit further, if you think about any sort of experience that is, you're having to deal with something that's caused you angst or problems with your mental health or whatever else, normally we come up with a narrative. So most people work out, well, what might have happened? And so they're using a part of the brain, they're using that prefrontal cortex, they're using that part that says, oh, this might. So there's a lot of the thought process and logic being used. With a lot of trauma, the trauma's not held in that part of the brain. It can be pre-verbal for a start. And also, when the amygdala switches in, that thinking part of the brain switches off. So trying to put that into words, a lot of people will try, but they can't really get to what actually matters. And the other part of the brain that's used when you're around horses and doing the work with the horses is the limbic system, which is that sort of more primitive part of the brain. So the reason I think that you get a reaction or a response, an outcome from equine therapy when nothing got said and it didn't look like anything happened, is because there's something going on at that lower level in the brain that we can't make a narrative out of. And for some reason, that's particularly powerful, because the damage or the destruction or whatever it is that caused you the problems you're having wasn't done at the verbal narrative building level. You know what I mean? So
it's stored in
exactly. So it's stored in your body for a start. So this is, you're in the open air, you're moving around, they're powerful. You have to stay in the moment. You can't be thinking about other things. People don't think about other things when they're around an animal that big. So you get all the benefits of that mindfulness sort of situation. No one's looking at you. They're all looking at the animals. You're not sitting in a room where someone's expecting something from you. And the thing I learned really early with my training, if I can give you an example of what happened at that training, there were a lot of people there, some of them much more well-accredited psychologists and also much more capable horse people. So it was a mixture, and there was a whole load of horses in the arena with us. And they said really early on, go and pick a horse and move it from one side of the arena to the other. And so what do we use? Oh, well, whatever, just have a look, do whatever, So there's no instruction. And so I spent ages trying to look really efficient and encourage this horse. Can I pull it? Can I push it? Can I be nice to it? Did nothing.
Again, I'm the horse person.
So, it wasn't doing a thing. And we went and sat back down. And the reason I said to you early on, I had this wow feeling, because when we sat down and I realised really quickly it was nothing to do with moving the horse. It was to do with what process did you use, what story did you tell yourself, and what did you decide about yourself when it wouldn't work. You've got all that in about 10 minutes. So there's a whole story of my life there. I thought I might be able to do it this way, but it ignored me or whatever. And people will really open up often about what they were trying to do with the horse. But you try and get them to tell you that about their husband or with their child, and they go into this sort of pre-worked out narrative that they think is going on.
That's true.
So, and people were really quick to go, I do that all the time. Like, oh my goodness, So that's when you do use language. But when you don't, because people don't want to, they just seem to go away and live better and function better. And it's just really weird. I felt really calm this week, and I've been really better at listening and connecting, and it's all stuff that these guys do really well. So
it sounds really powerful.
It is. It is really really powerful. You within sort of 3 sessions, you'll start to see stuff that really great stuff happens.
So. And that none of it's expected. It's all, it just comes up.
Another thing,
and none of it's planned either.
No,
It naturally unfolds and happens,
and
the horse has as much control over the session as we do.
So part of the treatment team is a mental health professional in the style that we use. There is lots of different styles of equine therapy. So the type of equine therapy that we use in our treatment team, we have a mental health professional, a horse professional, equine specialist, and the horses. So that's our treatment team. There are many different types of equine therapy. Some people do ridden. We don't. The training that I had, you didn't use ridden, and you always had an excellent specialist. And I've stuck with that because that works for me. There's other styles that people use, and it may work for them, and that's fine. The reason, and Becca said before, we don't do ridden, I believe that the relationship between the person and the horse changes. They turn into that, this is what I'm here for, this is my job. I've been, taught, because naturally horses weren't ridden. So I've been taught to behave in a way that I wouldn't actually in the wild. And to a degree they do in the arena anyway. I mean,
So let's talk a bit more specifically about the actual horses that are used for therapy. To Becca. So first of all, how do you actually choose the horses? I'm assuming there's some kind of process, and they need to have, do you choose them depending on their personality traits, or just do you train them to some extent to be therapy horses?
So they're all my horses that have a purpose outside of equine therapy. So they might be broodmares, so they have foals once a year or every couple of years, or competition horses, which I compete. I'm a show jumper, or retired, or anything along those lines. So we have 18 on the property currently, and every single one of them have a completely different personality to the other. And completely different ways of reacting to things, thinking about things, coping with things. Their version of a meltdown might be completely different to another horse's version of a meltdown. And so it's really about assessing almost day to day, because there's so many things which influence the horses, like weather, if it's raining, windy, the season's suddenly changing, they can get upset by that because of, or if it's about to rain, or they sense all of that. And so it's about being able to read the horse and be like, okay, what sort of state are you in today? What are you actually feeling like for me to pick up someone who knows you? And then work out, okay, this one's feeling particularly like the spring grass at the moment, so I wouldn't use that one for a session.
Yeah.
But we do have quite a lot which are very well behaved. We've had for years Vienna, who's just down there eating lucerne. I would trust her never to kick a person or anything like that. And most of ours, even my babies, I work with and train that people can run behind them and, you know, hug them on the bum, and you're not going to have to worry about them being like, oh my God, there's someone there, and then
Yeah.
reacting. So that is the way that I train them, and it's just how I like my horses to be. I like them
Not
to
kicking
still
you.
yeah, well, not to kick
Yeah.
you, but also I like them to have personality. I don't want them to be shut down. I don't want them to be just, you know, robots that compete and
Yeah.
jump the big jumps. I want them to still have that little bit of spunk and,
Yeah.
you know, like individual sort of personality. They're
Yeah.
not just all the same. Like you get strings of horses and none of them are going to be the same, but it's about working with their actual personality
Yeah.
and developing the things that work for them, and then you end up getting the best from the horse.
Yeah.
And then it makes them so lovely for therapy because they're playful, because they know that they can be, but they know how to do that safely.
Yeah.
And they feel comfortable enough, like, oh, I can, you know, like come up to that person, but I'm also respectful enough that I'm not going to smash them in the head
Yeah.
or anything like that.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of that fine line of making sure that they have boundaries, have respect for everyone, but still individuals.
Yeah.
Like they don't, like, because everyone's going to connect with something different as well.
Yeah.
So you don't want them all to be the same.
Yeah.
Like riding school ponies are very typical, like they're just robots. You tack them up, they go around in a circle. They don't, they're usually grumpy. Like,
Yeah.
whereas mine, I absolutely love that every single one is different, and every single one you have to approach things differently.
Yeah.
And so that's where it's good as well, working with multiple different horses, is that that method that you used on the last horse might not work for this one.
Yeah.
And that's very true in life. Like that method which you used to cope with your anxiety might have worked last time, but it might not work this time. And so
Yeah.
you've got to be able to adjust and sort of go with what's happening and problem solve while it's going on. And that's scary to do when you have a 500 to 600 kilo animal that could
Yeah.
crush you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think also because of that, people get a lot of confidence and almost belief in themselves. Like, wow, I can handle a 500 kilo like horse that, you know, like that's a big animal and I can lead. And I actually made them feel safe because a lot of it with horses is actually, and what we explain to the people is that for a horse to feel safe and comfortable, you actually need to be in charge. If you let them be the boss, they're going to feel more insecure because they're herd animals. Naturally, in a herd, you have a head mare, which will keep everyone in line, even the stallion.
Yeah.
And so you need to be that in that situation. And so it's so good for people building their own confidence in themselves and their ability and all that sort of stuff. And we try and make it so that they almost seem like they're helping the horse as well, because
Yeah.
of all of ours having other roles. So they might be high level jumpers, or they might be one which is getting rehabbed at the moment, and so we'll be like, oh, this one actually needs to lead over poles, could you help us with this?
Yeah.
And so it's taking the pressure off that it's almost them there for therapy as much as they're helping us
Yeah.
with the horses,
Yeah. Yeah, that's great.
which is really nice.
Yeah. Have you ever had a situation where someone's come and chosen a particular horse, but you know on that day the horse is a bit off or not quite ready for it that day?
So we have one mare, she's actually quite hormonal. She is very much influenced by her hormones, and so when it's that time, she's a dragon. And so if I know that it's always on top of where my horses are, because I pretty much live with them.
Yep.
Well, I do. And so I will tell people, like, we can't work with California today because it's just that time of the month. She's a girl, like,
Yep.
she's a mare.
Needs a
Some
break.
mares are like that,
Yeah.
like, you know.
Almost all of our horses are mares.
Yeah,
okay.
so so I particularly love mares. Geldings are lovely, don't get me wrong. They're really easygoing. They're really happy to do anything for you, whereas a mare has her person and you are her person. But you won't exactly become that person very easily. It takes a bit of time, but once they're like, okay, you're on my team, they will fight for you. Like, they will give their heart and soul to help you and work with you. But they're quite difficult when you start equine therapy because they're more reserved and more like, who are you?
Yeah.
Like, why should I trust you? And they almost question a lot more, and they're a bit more independent in that way, and especially keeping the personalities and all that. They would sort of be like, are you sure that you actually know what you're doing?
Yeah.
And so the person, which is really useful,
Yeah.
because the person has to be like, no, I am sure, even if they don't feel it. And
Yeah.
of course, being horses, even when you fake confidence, they're going to feel it.
Yep.
And so
They
you
know.
end up faking it until you make it. And then you are confident because you've overcome that situation or obstacle.
Yeah. Yeah.
So often we get different clients get different things from the therapy, but I would say pretty much all of them get more confidence from being in therapy. We do have a lot of kids. We
Yeah.
do have older people too. But even in leading a horse, especially when you haven't had a lot of exposure to horses, and these are big
Yeah,
horses.
they
you know.
actually
Well,
are.
think
huge.
about most people leading like a really big dog. They're
Yeah.
scared that that's going to pull you over.
Yeah.
I think a 500-kilo
Yeah.
horse could do more than pull you over.
Yeah.
So when they learn that they can lead it and it will listen, and that they do need to tune into whether they're considering how the horse feels. Like if they try and turn it on a really tight circle, that's really hard for them. Their bodies are too big. They can't turn on a tight circle. So they have to consider, what is my action doing to affect you?
Yeah.
They have to consider that if they wander and keep looking, we'll point out, we'll say, you're watching the horse, so who's watching where you're going? So they need to, they quickly make that, they compute that whole idea that if I know where I'm going and I walk there in a determined manner, this horse walks with me and is comfortable. And that's a really great lesson. Like
Yeah.
we don't talk about their lives. We talk about, so how did that work? And what happened when you knew where you were going? What happened when you walked forward in a determined manner, but you're considerate of the horse and whether it can cope with that? What happened? And what happens is they were successful.
Yeah.
And so you do find very regularly that people say their confidence grew.
Yeah.
Their sense of achievement grew.
Yeah.
Their sense of being able to connect grows. So even if that's what happens and nothing else, that's not magic. That's just working with big animals that, knowing how to do it. But one other thing I wanted to say, I was at a conference in Sydney many years ago, actually, about equine therapy, and there was a lady there was head of some statistical department in Darwin University or something, and she said, we need effective research because this is magic and voodoo, but you cannot tell funding bodies that. And she was the most scientific person I'd ever met. And I thought,
Yeah.
it's true. But you've got to try and put it into words that doesn't sound...
You can't put it
Talk about magic and voodoo.
Yeah.
But it's, so,
Yeah.
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 I'm not sure if that's a good thing to use, but...
Yeah. Well, it's true though. It's sometimes hard to describe
Yeah.
what it is, but there's some connection that we have with them.
Yeah.
How do you care for the horses that are used as, I mean, you said they're all used as therapy horses, but because with psychologists and things,
Yeah.
obviously you get burnt out quite
Yes.
easily if you're working with people with trauma all the
Yeah.
time. So how do you care for the horses that are working with people with trauma
I
constantly?
will hand over to Becca for this, but
Yeah.
as an observer, our horses are treated very differently to a lot of horses, and Becca spends a lot of time playing with them. They're not just being horses and being trained.
Yeah.
They actually have a very deep relationship with Becca, and we don't use them for hours on end. Like, I keep the numbers small and they're used now and then, but they get a lot of playing.
Yeah.
So I'll hand over to Becca.
Well, so because they obviously have other jobs outside of the equine therapy, and most of them are quite high-level jumpers and worth a little bit of money.
As they all are.
So they get looked after, I would say, better than most people. They have regular massages and physio, and they get rehabbed if they need to. If they're seeming burnt out or depressed, we do have one which suffers with depression.
Yeah.
Which not many people, even horse people, are like, interesting, which is Vienna, of course.
Yeah.
So we have to manage her by making sure that she has enough time out of the paddock, because she just likes to be around the people, and she gets really flat and really miserable in the paddocks and won't eat, and so it's not good for her welfare. And
Yeah.
so we make sure that they're living in a way that they can be their happiest that they can be,
Yeah.
so that they can recover from sessions and all that side of things.
Yeah.
But I've found that a lot of the time it doesn't seem to be too draining on them. I think because of how much physical work they do as well, being competition horses, it's nice for a change to, they're not as moving as much. They're, half the time they're walking. But it's all mental stimulation. And so it's really nice for them to have the contrast of, jumping big fences, but then also going and playing in an arena. And it makes them so happy, because they're not just machines that are just doing the same thing. They get to go, play with a little kid, and like you'll see some of them, and it's so funny, they'll see a little kid and they're just in love. They're just like, oh my God, this baby's mine now. And it's like, you're a horse, that's a human, what are you doing? And it's lovely, but I pay particular close attention to not just their physical health, but their mental health as well, and making sure that, they're not depressed and miserable, and that they're happy and they're, quirky and feeling the best that they can feel, because then they can give so much more to people.
Yeah, definitely.
We had a particularly lovely session with a young girl that actually a lot of her sessions were really lovely. She just loved being here, and she came for a long time, and she was just so bubbly and lively. She'd actually been expelled from school. We found it very difficult to imagine that could possibly have happened. She was just so beautifully behaved with us and so excited to be here. And a couple of things I'd like to relay that happened with her. She was also having speech therapy, and the speech therapist couldn't get her to come in the office, and actually rang me and said, would you mind if I come and watch a therapy session? I said, well, that's really not up to me. That's going to be up to the girl. It's not normal, and if she doesn't feel comfortable for that, then that's not going to work. So I asked her, and she said, yeah, it's no fine. I don't mind. It's fine. And so the lady came, and we just had one of our conventional sessions, which are were very joyful. A lot of the sessions are very joyful. The people are just so excited to be here. And at the end,
Play
it is.
horses.
It is. It's very play, and we're very playful with the kids as well.
Yeah.
So, and it's not only kids. We play with, the adults play as well. So the speech therapist came and she watched, and we came to the end of the session, and I went over, and the lady was almost in tears. She said, I've never seen her so happy. She won't come in my office. And she said, and at one point she was saying to the horse, would you just try for me? Would you just take one step for me? She said she used my exact words to encourage the horse to do something, and she's never engaged with me. So she was quite emotional afterwards. Same child, another day. We often have footballs in the arena. We have hula hoops. We have all sorts of bits and pieces.
Yeah.
And she was bouncing up and down on a football, and she had a bucket on her head, one of the horse buckets. It was clean. And I said, why? What are you doing? And she said, it feels good. And I said, well, I'm going to try. And the horses were just like watching and like, what are they doing? So I sat on, and we're bouncing. And I said, it feels fantastic. And she started laughing, and I started laughing. And this one here is like, you two, what are you doing? My horses don't know what you're doing. And it was just a really joyful session. Now, horses were there. They weren't particularly involved. They were sort of sniffing and going, oh, whatever,
No, they were actually quite involved, because at one point I think you guys were throwing balls over and in between their legs while they stood in between both of you on the footballs. So
yeah, I think that was earlier. It's very joyful.
Yeah.
We do a lot of playing. The horses are there. Sometimes they're really involved in the session, and it's all about what's happening with the horses. But sometimes they're just observing what we're doing as well.
Yeah.
The thing that people get out of it is that sense of playing and the sense of learning.
Yeah.
And to a person, they go away and either they say, or their caretaker or someone, they're just so calm afterwards. And that lasts, for periods of time and goes into their general lives.
And I guess it's using that creativity as well. You said there's a lot in the arena they can use, and you don't get the option to do that much.
No. And we don't over plan.
Yeah.
It's we will sort of say what will we do, but we don't predetermine. So we might have a plan of what we're going to think we're going to do, but the child
go absolutely out the window.
Yeah, of course.
Often the child or the person, that's not what they wanted to do, and so we go with what we're given, and whatever we're given is the thing they needed that day.
Yeah.
So that's how it works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. So how do you actually measure the effectiveness of equine therapy and measure the outcomes in the clients themselves?
That's probably something we need to improve upon. We do write reports for funding bodies that need to know what's going on. I'd say it was more qualitative than quantitative.
Yeah.
It's sort of semi-structured interviews, talking to caretakers. It's much more subjective about how people are performing in life and at school or at work or whatever else they're dealing with. We've got a funding body that are more interested in testing using psychometric testing, and they're actually wanting to do some of that. And I'm not unhappy to do that. That's not something we've done so far, and it probably is something that needs to be done because we really need to be contributing to some of the research that says this works, because it does.
Yeah.
And so we need to be able to comply with the more conventional methods for proving that it does.
Yeah.
So,
but I guess, as you said, it's quite obvious seeing it, the improvement in people and the confidence that they gain and everything.
Yeah. And that's really hard to quantify, but it's been very regular. So
yeah, definitely. Can either of you share a particular moment in any of the therapy sessions that you personally found quite moving?
I was at a conference in Sydney. The organisation had come over from America. I can't remember where we were, but we were in this massive indoor arena, like huge. Was it Marcus Hold'em? Yeah. And there were a lot of people there. There were a lot of treatment providers that had nothing to do with horses and just wanted to know what's this all about. And it was big deal stuff happening, Yeah. They approached me on the night before we were starting. I was there just to observe and said, look, you've done the training and we need to do a session where it's run like a therapy session, but you'll have a microphone. So it's not going to be an actual therapy session, but you can talk through what you're doing and they can see how it works. Yeah. Do you mind? And I'm like, okay. There's sort of 150 people watching or something. And I was, okay, fair enough. We'll do that. So that's as much as I knew.
Yeah.
So we start the next morning and they introduce me, and I wonder what on earth I put my hand up to. And there were probably at least a dozen young stock horses, loose, barely handled, really thundering around, but they'd all gone down the very far end because someone was unloading some cattle, and horses are very inquisitive and they were watching.
Yeah.
But there was one asleep on the sand closer up near the where we were watching from the stand. And so they said to me, take the microphone. They explained that I'd had the training, but we're going to do a sample as best we could of a session and what it looks like. So I said, yeah, fair enough. And they said, could you describe something? And I'd given no thought to it, typical of me. Can you describe something that you're dealing with that's really difficult at the moment? Well, I'd just gone through a huge separation and a financial disaster, and I'm like, what do I do? And I'm thinking, I need to build my business, need to get through this, don't know how to do it. Let's do equine therapy. It was right early on. I'd already got my qualifications. We had a couple of horses, I need to do this. So that's where I'm at. So I thought, let's work on that. So I explained that very briefly, try to keep it quite light. And they said, okay, could you pick a horse that represents your husband and one that represents you? So, of course, the one laying on the sand, I said, that's the husband because he's probably watching telly, and so I tried to make a joke out of it, let's not get too intense. And the one down the back there that's blonde, I'll have that, that's me, which happened to be a gelding, but, who cares? Anyway, as I said it, honestly, this is so hard to believe. The one I identified as me comes up and starts biting the one that's laying on the sand, trying to get him to get up. Because everyone's laughing. I'm thinking, oh, yeah, okay, fair enough. So they said, look, there's some bits of equipment here. There's agricultural pipes and all sorts. Can you build something that represents the journey? Now, my ex had a very large catamaran in the Mediterranean. We were going to be sailing around the Mediterranean, and the kids were going to be on it, and we were going to have teachers, and it was all going to be amazing. And so I picked 2 pipes. I was going to build the boat, and then I thought I'll build this sort of alleyway, which is the journey to my business, and I put this big barrel at the end, which is me running the business. So, and I'm telling them. So it's not a typical conventional, a session. I'm saying, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm doing it. So I go to move some of the agricultural pipes. Now, I'd had a couple of therapy sessions myself because I'm trying to deal with some difficult stuff.
Yeah.
And the lady had said, don't go too fast. You're going to scare yourself. Like, just slow things down, take a step at a time. You'll be okay. You've got these skills, this, that, and the other, all this positive stuff, which is great. So I picked these agricultural pipes, and I thought, oh, that's really heavy. And I thought, that's sort of, it is heavy, the stuff I'm dealing with. And I started to push it. I kicked it, and both horses spoke really big. And I went, if I could go too fast, and I'm talking, if I go too fast, I'm going to terrify these horses. And I went, that's interesting too, because that's what's happening to me. So I went slowly, and I set up this. And I'm saying, I need to go slowly. I need to take it a step at a time. And when I'm going slowly, they're a lot calmer. And I'm saying to them what's going on in my brain. So I set this up. They're at that point on the catamaran, and they're fighting. Like, they're biting each other. The other horses are still watching the cows.
Yeah.
So, like, this is all happening. I'm like, this is
so
really weird. Anyway, set this thing up, and they start sniffing it, the 2 of them. And then I'm saying, I need to make this journey from this catamaran to this business that's functional, and I've got to work out how to do it. So she's trying to bite him and push him up there, and he's trying to bite her back. And then one of them pushes the pipe wider. And then she walks up there and starts sniffing the barrel at the end. And I said, she just made it easier for herself. She was nervous walking up that narrow path, so she's given herself really wide parameters, and she's made that journey, and she's got to the end by doing it at a rate she could cope. And that was the end.
Yeah.
The thing I can add is that there were probably over 100 people, and I think half of them at least came up to me afterwards and said, how long did it take you to train those horses? And I said, I've never met. They were barely handled, these horses. And it was like, and the people from America said, that was amazing. I said, how did that happen? And
something
that's
clicked.
The type of thing that can happen.
Yeah, that's a lovely story. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it is. It's 100% true.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I've just got one last question for you both. Maybe if you both want to give answers. I ask at the end of every podcast what your favorite fact about psychology is, but what is it about equine therapy that is really special or important to you guys personally?
Would you like to answer that first?
Yeah, sure. I think why I love it so much and love seeing people benefit from it is because I know that I've benefited from it myself my whole life. I've been around horses since I was 18 months old, and they have saved my life multiple times and helped me through some of the hardest times of my life. And that unspoken connection which you have, which you can't put into words, there really isn't. Like, I try to find the words all the time, and you can't. There's just, it's the thing which I honestly think of is actually do you know Avatar?
Yeah.
With the whole horses and
the connecting.
and it connects. And
Yeah.
it honestly is, that is the closest thing that I can say to the connection
Yeah.
which you can have with them, and just they know you better than you know yourself, because they'll pick up on things which your brain isn't even registering at the time, because you might have it, you might have your feelings shut off or blocked, and yet they'll pick up on that and almost bring your own attention to it. And they've helped me work out how to approach my own mental health, and taught me so much about just being able to function through living with CPTSD and how to approach things, and having that connection with them is just like you can't put it into words, but I love seeing other people get that same benefit and even just start to tap into that sort of connection. Like, obviously it takes time, but, you know, within a few sessions and because of the stuff that they're working with, I think the horses really do tune in and pay attention. You can see in their eyes that all their focus is on you in that moment, and then something will happen and their brain drifts off, and that's exactly what people are like as well. Something can be so big and then something else happens and you're like, oh, what was that?
Yep.
And it's just lovely to watch and see people's lives improve, like mine has, just through having horses and watching them help people and seeing just how kind and giving horses are and how they have no reason to trust us. They have no reason to be like, oh yeah, you guys are safe. It's like we're their predator, like they're prey, and yet they still choose to be kind and be willing and to work and help and understand, which I don't think many people are like that.
Just thinking about working in psychology, I've always tried to bring fun into sessions, even when I'm a traditional therapist. Like I tend to connect really well with people, and I think trying to connect to that playful part of yourself is a really important aspect of successful therapy.
Yeah, definitely.
It's so much easier to do that in an open space around horses. And I know for myself, because I work in other areas in mental health as well as the equine therapy. I call this my play job. I know that when I come outside and do an equine therapy session, I connect to a really childlike part of myself, and I think it's really valuable for people to be able to connect to that. So I can give another story of a young guy that was coming, and I think it was my birthday, and I think he would have been about 15 or something like that, and he asked me how old I was going to be, and I was going to be 60 or something similar, and he said, you can't be. And I said, well, I am. And he said, but you're 4. I said, no, I'm not. And he said, but you've got the mind of a 4-year-old. I said, I think I'm going to take that as a compliment.
Yeah, I would.
But I think it's because connecting with that childlike part of people, they bring out something that you can't connect to when you're suffering with mental health problems. So it allows them to feel that again. Yeah, that's what I love about it particularly.
I think another thing which I'll just add, which I've noticed with my own mental health, and you know, you can have the worst day going on and you go to the horses and you're with the horses and it leaves your brain. You're just with the horse, focusing on what you're doing, because if you're not, then you could get injured, because that is very much the reality of it. You know, if your mind's elsewhere and the horse suddenly turns around and bumps you out of the way, like, so you're very much in the moment and focusing on that moment. And it's so hard, especially as you get older. Like, as little kids, you're pretty much always in the moment, like you function that way most of the time. Whereas once you're an adult, you're literally always thinking about either the past stuff that's happened, or the future, or you know, jobs you have to be doing or should have done, or all that sort of stuff. And so to actually just have peace, and your brain almost feels empty for a while, and you're just there in the moment with the horse, feeling the connection. It's so refreshing, I guess, would be, and relaxing. And I think that's why people take so much away from it, because it's anywhere else, any other situation in your life, like even, you know, on your phone, sitting on the couch, TV, anything like that, your brain's still usually churning and thinking of things, whereas when you're with a horse, you are just thinking about what's going on in the moment, and all that is just so helpful for mental health, and for almost feeling like you can breathe for a minute and just relax and just sit and just be, which isn't really that easy in life anymore.
It's a natural mindfulness, just being with horses. Well, thank you both for sharing those answers, and thank you so much for all the information you've given me.